The world does not change all at once. It begins with a single street bending in a direction it was never designed to move. The figure stands at the far end, rewriting the structure of the city with every breath. The spiral watches from above, unable to intervene. The fracture stirs beneath the pavement, sensing the distortion. This is the moment the archive loses its first rule: stability. For an instant, the distortion feels almost harmless. A soft tremor, a quiet suggestion that something is out of place. Streetlights flicker as if startled awake. The air tightens around the figure, folding inward with a subtle, unnatural pull. Beneath the asphalt, the fracture shivers, recognizing the first hint of collapse. And with that single impossible bend, the city begins to forget the shape it once knew. The archive reacts first. Shelves shift, pages rewrite themselves, and entire histories collapse into blank space. The figure moves through the aisles, altering the structure of recorded reality. Every step creates a new version of events. Every breath erases another. The spiral attempts to lock the archive, but the locks dissolve. The fracture senses opportunity. A soft vibration passes through the stacks, barely perceptible but unmistakably wrong. Ink trembles on the page, as if preparing to abandon its meaning. The air tightens around the figure, bending the aisles into subtle, unnatural curves. The spiral's geometry flickers at the edges, struggling to hold its form. Beneath the shifting floorboards, the fracture listens, feeling the first cracks widen, and with each rewritten moment, the archive slips further from the reality it once defined. The rewriting expands. Maps lose their meaning. Borders dissolve. Landmasses shift as if the world is being rearranged by an unseen hand. The figure's influence spreads beyond the archive, reaching into the physical world. The spiral attempts containment. The fracture prepares retaliation. A faint tremor ripples across the continents, subtle yet unmistakably wrong. Coastlines waver, their outlines blurring like wet ink. The spiral's geometry flickers as it strains to anchor the shifting world. Deep below, the fracture stirs with growing anticipation, feeling the first fractures widen into something far more dangerous. And with each altered contour, the planet drifts further from the shape it once believed immutable. The rewriting touches homes, streets, and familiar spaces. Rooms duplicate themselves. Windows show futures that never occurred. The figure's influence spreads without pattern, without mercy. The spiral warns the fracture to stay dormant. The fracture refuses. A thin shiver moves through the neighborhood, barely noticeable yet undeniably wrong. Doorframes stretch a fraction too wide, and reflections hesitate before following their owners. The spiral's warning echoes through the shifting geometry, but the fracture only stirs deeper, sensing the first true break in the world's foundation. And with each altered doorway, the familiar becomes something quietly, dangerously new. Movement becomes unreliable. Highways loop into themselves. Vehicles freeze mid-motion. The figure rewrites physics with casual indifference. The spiral attempts to stabilize the region. The fracture begins rising, A thin vibration skims across the asphalt, making shadows stutter as if unsure which direction to follow. Traffic lights flicker out of sync, their colors stretching into brief, impossible gradients. The spiral strains to anchor momentum, but the rules of motion slip through its grasp. Beneath the shifting ground, the fracture pushes upward, sensing the first true break in the world's balance. And with each stalled moment, reality loses confidence in its own forward motion. Nature collapses under the rewrite. Trees shift positions. The sky flickers between states. Animals freeze, then vanish. The spiral's influence weakens. The fracture rises, sensing the world's vulnerability. A thin pulse moves through the forest, making leaves shimmer as if caught between seasons. Clouds hesitate mid-formation, their shapes bending into unfamiliar patterns. The spiral reaches outward, trying to steady the trembling horizon, but its hold slips beneath the trembling soil. The fracture pushes upward, emboldened by the unraveling order, and with each vanished creature, the natural world loses another piece of itself. The fracture awakens fully, cracks spread across the underground chamber, glowing with impossible light. The figure's rewriting destabilizes the world's foundation. The spiral descends, preparing confrontation. A low rumble rolls through the chamber, making the glowing fissures pulse like a heartbeat. Dust lifts from the floor in slow, unnatural spirals, drawn toward the widening cracks. The spiral's descent sends ripples through the trembling air, its geometry flickering as it braces for what comes next. And with each expanding fracture, the ground remembers how easily it can break. The spiral descends, manifesting as a towering geometric construct. Symbols rotate around it, attempting to rewrite the rewrite. The figure stands unmoved. The fracture expands. The collision becomes inevitable. A deep resonance hums through the chamber, making the rotating symbols flare with strained brilliance. The spiral's form wavers at the edges, its geometry struggling to counter the spreading distortion. Dust lifts from the ground in slow arcs, drawn toward the widening glow of the fracture. The figure remains perfectly still, its presence bending the air around it with quiet, relentless force. And with each pulse of light, the space between them thins to nothing. The figure raises its hand, rewriting the spiral structure. Symbols distort, angles collapse. The fracture expands, feeding on the instability. The world trembles as its rules dissolve. A sharp pulse ripples through the chamber, making the spiral's geometry flicker like a dying star. The symbols orbiting it twist into warped, broken forms, shedding fragments of meaning as they fall. The air shudders, bending round the figure's gesture with unnatural force. Beneath them, the fracture swells, its glow intensifying as it devours every collapsing rule. And with each distorted angle, the world slips further from the logic that once held it together. The spiral and fracture collide. Light and darkness merge. The world bends violently, unable to withstand the rewrite. The figure watches, expressionless, as the collision tears through reality. A shockwave ripples outward, warping the air into trembling ribbons of distortion. The spiral's geometry splinters into luminous shards, while the fracture's darkness coils upward like rising smoke. The ground heaves, unable to decide which set of rules to obey. The collision deepens, folding space into jagged, impossible angles as the figure remains still, its presence anchoring the chaos without effort. And with each violent pulse, the fabric of reality thins toward breaking. The world collapses. Cities fragment into geometric shards. Oceans rise into vertical walls. The sky tears open. The figure continues rewriting, indifferent to the destruction. The first rupture forms, expanding outward. A deep groan rolls through the broken horizon, making the fractured cities vibrate like glass under strain. The ocean's towering walls shimmer, bending light into warped reflections of futures that never existed. The sky's torn edges pulse, widening with each breath the figure takes. The rupture swells, its glow intensifying as it devours the last remnants of stability. And with every widening pulse, the world slips closer to complete unmaking. The rupture expands, splitting the world into two versions. Light pours through, revealing structures not meant to be seen. The figure steps toward the rupture, ready to rewrite whatever lies beyond. The spiral retreats, the fracture grows, the world enters its next state. A thin vibration hums through the divided landscape, making the two versions shimmer at their edges. The unseen structures pulse with quiet, impossible motion, beckoning the figure forward. The spiral withdraws into fading geometry, while the fracture swells, feeding on the widening split. And with each trembling pulse, the world drifts deeper into its rewritten form.